Chinese New Year may be over, folks, but the vibes are still here, as the Shanghai Jing X Red Winter event, Radiant Moon Rocker's Dream, is arriving in this week's BA Global Update, and with it comes the new 3-star units, Qipao Marina and Qipao Tomoe. No Qipao Chirino though, since her VA announced her departure a couple months ago. Arigato gozaimasu, Tange Sakura-san, for bringing our great leader to life with your amazing talent, and I wish you luck in your future endeavors. Anyways, here is a short review of our two communist girls. Starting off with our favorite communist janitor, it's the Aru of Red Winter, Qipao Marina. Okay, elephant in the room. Her portrait's art style isn't great. I don't know how to explain it, but the shading is a lot darker compared to BA's usual bright and vibrant colors. Plus, out of the 3 students whose portraits' art styles are like this, in my opinion, Marina's is probably the worst and sparked the most outrage among the community towards MX2J, which is a damn shame, especially for the Marina bros out there who have been eagerly waiting for an out of their wife. But on a positive note, at least her Qipao is flaunting off her sexy body way more, something her uniform doesn't really do, like her giant knockers and those armpits. Also, the team in charge of making the L2Ds have knocked it out of the park again, cause Q Marina's looks amazing. Those saggy tits right in front of my face, a cool expression which will easily break, and that beautiful scenery. I especially love the Chinese structure out there in the middle of what I believe is a lake, and the red flowers all over. While I ain't the biggest Marina fan, I don't really like girls with hair that short. I'm glad the Marina bros got this aesthetic L2D to make up for her portrait's bad art style. So, what kind of student is Qipao Marina? Well, she is a permanent piercing DPS striker who wears heavy armor, and she has the following terrain moves: D combat power in urban terrains, S combat power in field, and B combat power in indoor terrains. She also uses gloves, pin and watch as her equipment, similar to a number of other secondary DPS units. Let's take a look at her skills. First off, her simple 6-cost EX deals damage to one enemy while applying the poison dot debuff onto them, which constantly inflicts damage every 4 seconds for 32 seconds. With her basic skill, she once again deals damage to one enemy every 35 seconds, but if the enemy is already afflicted with the poison status effect, then her attack speed is also increased for 25 seconds. Her enhanced skill improves her normal attack range and attack, and her sub-skill allows her normal attacks to deal additional damage to poison-afflicted enemies. At UE 40, her enhanced skill plus further boosts her attack, and at UE 50, her field combat power upgrades from S to SS. Now, how good is Qipao Marina? Well, as you can tell from her kit, she is a decent piercing DPS unit, but more importantly, she is primarily a dot debuffer. Particularly, she specializes in inflicting the poison debuff. She's able to do so using her EX skill, applying a fairly strong poison dot debuff onto one enemy that can deal good damage with his 561% multiplier at max level, plus it lasts for a lengthy amount of time at 32 seconds, meaning she can almost consistently maintain this debuff. While she definitely isn't as powerful as some other dot users like Swimsuit Sayori, she is undoubtedly the strongest poison debuff unit in the game so far. I mean, the other poison users are Rats, the Yandere Twin, and Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmare, so the competition isn't exactly great. Not only that, her EX also has the added ability of dishing out decent single target damage with its respectable 414% multiplier at level 5 skill. Though this attack isn't that strong, and her EX's main damage output still lies in the dot debuff. Also, due to its expensive 6 cost, you would of course need to pair her with cost reduction units in order to lessen this burden. Next, Q Marina's basic skill is pretty useful as it ties in with her EX. While it too can deal decent damage to one enemy as a result of its 452% multiplier, if said enemy is already afflicted with any poison dot debuff, not just hers, she increases her own attack speed by 28.8% at max level skill, with this buff lasting for 25 seconds. And there's only a short 10-second downtime between activations after the initial one, since her basic skill procs every 35 seconds. Thus, as you can see, her basic synergizes well with her EX. And ideally, you'd want the enemy to already have the poison debuff whenever her basic procs. so that she gains the attack speed buff. And while this buff isn't anything exceptional, at the very least she can pump out more normal attacks, which also works well with her sub skill. More on that in a bit. Her enhanced skill is also quite useful. The improved normal attack range allows her to stay behind the tank in battle, while the attack buff is more important cause it directly boosts her dot damage. And at UE40, the extra attack buff she gains on her enhanced skill plus doesn't just make her a stronger dot unit, but it also increases her overall damage, like her EX and basic skills single target hits. Finally, her sub-skill allows her to deal 10.1% additional damage to enemies afflicted with poison at level 10 skill. And like I mentioned, this ties in with both her EX and basic skills, cause by implanting the poison dot debuff onto one enemy using her EX, she will gain her basics attack speed buff when it procs, letting her dish out more powerful normal attacks to the poison enemy at a faster rate. Hence, all these make Marina a good poison dot user, being the strongest one that we currently have, as well as a relatively average yellow DPS unit. So, where can Qipao Marina be used in? Well, despite being a decent piercing damage dealer, she unfortunately doesn't see much use in most yellow content. This is because her damage output very much pales in comparison to other yellow single target DPS students whom can easily dish out tons of damage and act as the main hyper carry. Plus, most of her firepower comes from a poison dot, which is also unfortunately not as effective in normal content, only fitting a certain niche. Instead, as a powerful dot user, she has become an excellent unit for Yellow Chokma, the new final restriction boss. I won't go too much into detail about this boss since this isn't a Chokma guide, but essentially in this mode, you have to use dot debuffs to decrease his reactor gauge, which by the way is indicated by this bar, and in phase 1, once it hits 0%, it sends him into recovery mode, subsequently letting him receive more damage since he gains temporary and permanent debuffs like decreased crit damage res and crit res, as well as an unstable flame stack. While in phase 2, it takes 100% increase incoming damage if the gauge is below 70%. Not only that, from floor 75 onwards, whenever he receives damage from dot debuffs, he obtains a 10-second 10% increase incoming damage debuff that stacks up to 5 times, which can be extremely helpful since he also decreases all incoming damage by 50 to 80% depending on the floor. Thus, with all these, you need to utilize dot students like Marina in order to consistently maintain the 10% increase incoming damage debuff on him while constantly reducing his reactor gauge to get him into recovery mode and building up his unstable flame stacks so that you can use the ballistas on him. Also, since the reactor's percentage decreases based on the amount of damage the dot inflicts, i.e. higher dot damage equals greater decrease in reactor gauge, you need to bring in units with high dot multipliers, and they must also be of the correct attack type so that it deals 2 times damage. Hence, all these make Marina the best dot applier for Yellow Armored Chokma, as she can reduce his reactor's gauge faster with her more powerful dot damage compared to the other piercing dot users. And she is brought into many Sensei's teams, especially on the higher floors, where her main role is to simply apply and consistently maintain her poison dot debuff, which is made easier by her debuff's long 32-second duration, plus her 6 cost EX isn't an issue due to the cost meter's fast recovery speed. However, unlike Swimsuit Sayori, who also acts as one of the main DPS units in Blue Chokma, Marina is more of a sub-DPS, as her damage output outside of her dot isn't great, and you would rely on other yellow single target damage dealers to be the hyper carry instead. Nevertheless, Marina has become an important unit for this mode, as she would definitely help in clearing the higher floors much more easily, though final restriction battles are generally really difficult, so you still need the correct units and proper understanding of the boss's mechanics to beat this mode. So overall, should you pull for Marina? Well, in my opinion, if you really want to succeed and have smoother runs in Yellow Chokma, especially on the harder difficulty stages, then sure, you may pull for her. Though keep in mind that you would need to invest into her, such as getting her to UE40/UE50 if you plan on tackling the higher floors. However, outside of that, she doesn't see any use elsewhere. And heck, even in Chokma, where she can make things much easier, you can still manage without her on the lower floors, as you can just use other yellow dot units in her stead even though they aren't as strong. Thus, if you don't plan on really taking on Yellow Chokma, I would personally recommend skipping her and saving your pyroxenes. especially considering that there are many important upcoming units, and the fact that we are off the back of the 3.5 anniversary banners plus the recent 3-month gap announcement, though if she is your waifu, then you may of course just pull for her. Next, we have Chirino's advisor, it's Qipao Tomoe, and I can honestly describe her design like this. Mommy sorry, mommy sorry, mommy sorry, mommy sorry, mommy sorry, mommy sorry. Holy fuck, she is hot. Literally the first time I saw her in the event art, wow, I shit you not, my dick was fucking twitching. Not only are her calcium cannons now on full fucking display, but those breathable hips that are basically signaling her as prime and ready to become a mother of 10, and her cute short tied up pink hair that gives her an even more motherly look are some of the main reasons why I find her so sexy. I'm absolutely in love with Qipao Tomoe's design. Maybe because I find women in Chinese clothing attractive, could be my Chinese genes. And to me, she has gone from being a mostly under the radar unit to one of the hottest students in the game, mainly cause her uniform has also been hiding her secret power this entire time. So, what type of student is Qipao Tomoe? She is a permanent special mystic supporter whose terrain moods are as such: D combat power in urban terrains, B in field, and S indoors. These are the equipment she uses: shoes, patch, and necklace, with the necklace helping to improve her shoes' durability. Let's take a look at her skills. With a 3-cost EX, she relocates up to 5 allies or enemies in a round-shaped area to a selected location, while granting a different effect depending on the target. For allies, she provides a barrier that lasts for 25 seconds, as well as a leaflet stack for 35 seconds. But for enemies, she decreases their defense for 25 seconds instead. With a basic skill, which procs every 30 seconds, she increases the attack of the student with the highest attack in the team for 20 seconds, with the amount varying based on the number of leaflet stacks held by all allies. Her enhanced skill boosts her healing, and her sub-skill amplifies the attack of all mystic type students. Her enhanced skill plus at UE40 gives her additional healing, and her indoor combat power improves from S to SS at UE50. So, is Q Tomoe any good? Well, she is considered as both a shielder and repositioner in one, due to her EX skill. Focusing on the latter first, with it, she can relocate up to 5 allies to a designated location, all for the low cost of 3. But more interestingly, it also has the unique ability of repoing up to 5 enemies, sort of like Jury's skill. Plus, you can also combine them, for instance, repoing 4 enemies and 1 ally. This ability has opened up a number of possibilities/strategies, mainly for AoE units, as she can group 5 enemies together, especially those outside of their range, allowing them to hit all the enemies, dealing more damage. And this is particularly useful for AoE damage dealers whose EXs are quite awkward, such as armed Oshinos and Arus, since you can now ensure their subsequent AoE explosions hit all the enemies by gathering them in one spot using Tomoe and timing their EX at the right moment. The range at which she can repo your students/the enemies is also pretty wide, though this can be a double-edged sword since you could accidentally move the wrong person if you aren't careful. Aside from that, her EX will also grant different effects depending on who she repositions. Allies will receive a fairly durable shield whose HP is equal to 165% of her healing at level 5 skill, with it lasting for a decent amount of time at 25 seconds, as well as a leaflet stack to each repoed student that lasts for 35 seconds. More on this in a bit. The shield that she provides is actually pretty strong, and compared to her direct competitor, Swimsuit Shizuko, when both are UE50 with max level equipment, the former's shield is slightly stronger due to her marginally higher multiplier, though it certainly isn't as beefy as track Yuka's. On the other hand, the enemies that get repoed will receive a 24.7% defense down debuff for 25 seconds at level 5 EX. And while these numbers might not seem like a lot, it can still be pretty useful against groups of enemies with high defense. Not to mention, you can also plant this debuff onto single stationary enemies by placing her EX right under/next to them, allowing you to exploit it against bosses. Next, her basic skill is also pretty good, as she boosts the attack of the student with the highest attack stat, and her buff values depend on the number of leaflet stacks that your team is holding. So for example, if your team has 0 leaflet stacks, she grants a 28.8% attack buff, which is the lowest. 1 leaflet equals 33.1% attack buff, 2 leaflets equals 37.5%, 3 leaflets gives 41.8%, and finally 4 or more leaflets gives the highest buff, increasing that student's attack by a whopping 46.1%. However, even though the 4 or more leaflet stacks attack buff can greatly increase that unit's firepower, you shouldn't feel too pressured to constantly maintain such a high amount of leaflet stacks, cause you can't expect to keep repoing your team. Plus, the 29% attack buff that she grants at 0 stacks is still quite good. One last thing, the caveat to this skill is that it targets the student with the highest attack, which doesn't necessarily mean your main hyper carry, and it can buff the wrong unit under certain circumstances. For example, machine gun, sniper, and rocket launcher users generally have a high attack stat, but it doesn't mean they are the main damage dealer. Hence, you will need to buff your hyper carry using attack buffs from other sources so that their attack is boosted, allowing them to receive Tomoe's basic skills attack buff. Moving on, her enhanced skill, and especially her enhanced skill plus, directly improves her shield's beefiness, making her a more competent shielder, though 3-star Q Tomoe is usually more than sufficient. And finally, her sub-skill being able to passively increase your Mystic student's attack by 24.2% at level 10 skill is also pretty handy, though this means you can't take advantage of it outside of blue focused teams. Hence, overall, Q Tomoe has a bunch of utility in her kit, acting as a good shielder, repositioner, defense shredder, and attack buffer all in one. Now, where can Qipao Tomoe be used in? Well, for one, she has seen a little bit of use in content that requires shielders/repositioners, such as Gauss and Shirokuro, where her role was to simply move your units out of the way of their attacks, such as their snowballs, park rides, trains, and hat attacks, or relocate them in front of the real Gauss, while providing them with a shield, which is important since recovery rate in these two raids is greatly reduced. Plus, in Gauss, he deals less damage to shielded students. Not to mention, her sub-skill is effective in these two raids, since traditionally they are blue raids, so her sub is more useful as you'll be bringing in Mystic units. However, with all that being said, her pick rate in both Gauss and Shirokuro is very low, especially for the former, cause while you can theoretically use her, many players opt to use Track Yuka instead, especially on Insane and Torment, as a shield is way more durable. Or, in Shiro's case, cover units like Arm Toshino are utilized more to block his attacks. Not to mention, Track Yuka being a striker allows players to use more important units in their special slot. Hence, this is why Q Tomoe doesn't see much use in either of these raids, though you can still bring her into your second to third teams if you need a good shielder plus repositioner. Plus again, her 3-star version would be more than sufficient even on the harder difficulties. On the other hand, she has been used a lot in Urban Kaiten, specifically in Phase 1 against the Rangers, and primarily on Insane/Torment, potentially Lunatic as well. This because by using her EX, you would firstly repo and group the Rangers together while decreasing their defense. Then, by using AoE damage dealers like Aru, Yuzu, or Swimsuit Hanako, you can actually hit all of them at once, dealing massive amounts of damage. Whereas before, it was almost impossible to damage all 5 Rangers since they are pretty far apart from one another. Thus, this new tech has become extremely popular, especially on the harder difficulties, as it allows senseis to cheese through this phase quickly, resulting in faster clears and higher scores. However, this strat does come with a bunch of crit molding, mostly since you'll be using AoE DPS units like Aru and Yuzu, who are infamous for having crit problems. Plus, you also need to place her EX at the correct specific spot, as well as timing her EX at the right moment, so that the Rangers don't run away too early when launching your AoE attack. Regardless, if you manage to pull off the strat, you'll be able to dish out tons of damage to the Rangers, taking them out very quickly. Though again, this is technically a premium strat that's only done on the higher difficulties, so don't feel pressured to do it if you can't, and you can always just rely on the good old D Hina hyper carry instead. So overall, overall should you pull for Q Tomoe? Well, in my opinion, if you plan on utilizing the Kaiten Phase 1 strat that I was just talking about, maybe because you want to get a better score by clearing Phase 1 faster, or if you want a good substitute shielder plus repositioner for either Gauss or Shirokuro, then sure, go ahead and pull for her. However, if you don't care about competing for a high score in the Kaiten raid, / you are able to borrow her from your club and friends list, or you do have other shielders plus repositioners in lieu of Q Tomoe, then I personally think you may skip her and save your Paroxysms for the upcoming significant units, as she currently isn't as important. Though if she is your waifu and you wanna be jockeying to that scrumptious L2D that shows off those magnificent mommy milkers, then go ahead and pull for her. And that's all for this week's review. Let me know who you're pulling for if you are. Good luck with your pulls, and I'll see y'all in the next one.